Millionaire's one-night mistake. He thought it was casual, until he found out she's a virgin. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories every week. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The rain was heavy over Miami that night. Inside the glass walls of the Grandview Hotel, a soft jazz tune played through the bar speakers while thunder rolled over the Atlantic. Dr. Alex Henderson, 35 years old, the youngest neurosurgeon to ever lead a team at Westlake Medical Center, sat alone at the counter. His tie was loosened, his eyes red from exhaustion. Hours ago, he had lost a patient on the operating table, a boy barely 12. To everyone else, it was a complication. To Alex, it was failure. He stared into his glass of bourbon like it might erase the memory. For a man known for absolute precision, tonight he wanted nothing but chaos. The door opened, and a gust of wet wind swept in along with a young woman. Her white hospital coat clung to her shoulders, damp from the storm. Jasmine Moore, 26, a medical intern finishing her third consecutive overnight shift. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor as she sat a few seats away, rubbing her temples, trying to stay awake. Alex glanced sideways. There was something about her too calm for someone that tired, too quiet for a world that never stopped talking. When the bartender asked what she wanted, she hesitated before whispering, "Just water, please. Oli." Her voice was soft, but it carried more exhaustion than his entire week. He found himself speaking before he could stop. "You look like you have been through hell." She gave a faint smile. "Night shift. Pediatrics. I have seen worse." He nodded. "Neurosurgery. I guess we both live on caffeine and regrets." Their laughter was low, awkward, but real. For once, Alex was not a millionaire surgeon, and she was not an intern terrified of failing. They were just two humans trying to remember what it felt like to breathe. Minutes turned into hours. One drink became two. Outside, the rain turned the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and blue. When they finally rose from their seats, neither of them said where they were going. The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of electricity. Jasmine's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She had never done anything like this. But there was something in his eyes, not desire, but sorrow, that pulled her in like gravity. Inside the dim hotel room, the air smelled faintly of bourbon and ocean salt. He touched her face like he was afraid she might disappear. And she let him, because for the first time in years, she felt seen. The world outside vanished. When morning came, sunlight spilled through half-closed curtains. The space beside her was empty. Only a folded note remained on the pillow. "Do not overthink it. Take care. A.H." Jasmine sat in silence, the sound of the ocean distant through the glass. She whispered the words once more, as if repeating them might make them mean less. "Do not overthink it." Then she saw it, a hospital badge lying near the edge of the bed. Her badge. Her name engraved in small silver letters. J. Moore, neurosurgery intern. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. She remembered his steady hands, the precision in his voice, and the way he never said his name. A strange chill swept through her. It was over. A single night. No promises, no goodbyes. But something in her heart whispered that this was not the end. Outside, Miami shimmered in the sunlight as if nothing had happened. Yet somewhere in that same city, Dr. Alex Henderson stood by the hospital window, holding her lost badge in his hand, his reflection split by the glass. He told himself it was just a mistake. But deep down, for the first time in years, his perfectly controlled world did not feel so steady anymore. 1 week later, the morning sun was already burning through the Florida sky when Jasmine Moore stepped into the gleaming marble lobby of Tampa General Hospital. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she adjusted her new ID badge. It felt strange to be back in the neurosurgery department, the same field that once inspired her, and now reminded her of that night she could not forget. The sliding doors opened with a soft hiss, and the scent of antiseptic filled her lungs. She told herself she was ready, that the past was gone. But when she heard the voice echoing across the hallway, her breath stopped. "Residents, gather in or two in 5 minutes." The voice was calm, deep, and commanding. Dr. Alex Henderson. Jasmine froze. The paper in her hand crumpled slightly. She turned and saw him at the end of the hall, wearing the same composed expression she remembered, white coat perfectly pressed, eyes sharp, posture confident. He looked exactly like the man she had left in that hotel room. Their eyes met for only a second. Recognition flashed, followed immediately by silence. He gave no sign, no smile, no frown. Just a small nod as if she were any other intern. Inside, her heart ached, but her face remained calm. She reminded herself that he was her superior now, and she was here to learn, not to relive a mistake. In the operating room, fluorescent lights glared down on the stainless steel tables. Jasmine stood at the observation rail, trying to steady her breathing. Alex worked with absolute control, every movement precise, almost mechanical. He gave short, clear instructions to the nurses. It was easy to see why the media called him the hands of God. Sunsi. As she watched, she realized something unsettling. He operated the same way he had lived, disconnected, efficient, untouched by emotion. During the post-op briefing, he turned to the group of interns. "In neurosurgery, control is everything," he said. "Lose focus for 1 second, and someone dies." The words struck Jasmine harder than they should have, because she knew that behind that cold tone was a man who had already lost control once with her. That evening, the hospital cafeteria was nearly empty. Jasmine sat alone, flipping through patient charts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. "You are trending, girl. New attending is so hot." She sighed and turned it face down. Then a shadow fell over her table. Intern Moore. She looked up. Alex stood there, a file in his hand, his expression unreadable. "You left this in the lab," he said, setting down a small silver pen. It was hers, engraved with her initials. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second. A current passed through both of them, quick and unspoken. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her tone steady. He hesitated before replying. "You are scheduled to assist in the spinal tumor case tomorrow. Do not be late." Then he walked away. For the first time, Jasmine noticed a faint bandage on his right hand, the same hand that had once traced the outline of her face. Later that night, Alex stood by the window of his office. The city lights shimmered on the bay, reflected in his glass of bourbon that he never drank. He still had her old badge locked in his drawer, the one she had left behind that night. He told himself it was meaningless, just a forgotten item. But each time he opened the drawer, he found himself staring at her name, J. Moore. He hated that he remembered how she looked when she slept, how she laughed when nervous. He hated that his mind wandered when it should have been calculating. For a man built on discipline, she was the one variable he could not control. The next day came fast. Jasmine scrubbed in, her hands shaking slightly as she tied the surgical mask. Alex stood opposite her at the table. He noticed her trembling and said quietly, almost gently, "Steady hands, doctor. The brain does not forgive mistakes." She met his eyes. "Neither does life," she replied. For a second, he stopped breathing. There it was again, that quiet strength beneath her calm voice. He turned back to the patient, but his heartbeat no longer matched the steady rhythm of the monitors. The surgery was long and tense. Midway through, one of the instruments slipped from a nurse's hand, clattering to the floor. Jasmine instinctively caught the pressure line before it tore loose. Alex looked at her, surprised. Her hands were steady now. He nodded once, silently approving. Hours later, the patient stabilized. The team stepped out of the room, exhausted but safe. Outside, in the corridor, Jasmine leaned against the wall to breathe. Alex passed by, stopping briefly beside her. "Good work," he said. His voice was softer than before. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, trying not to meet his gaze. He walked away again, but this time he glanced back. For the first time since that night, his expression carried something human: guilt, admiration, and something dangerously close to longing. That night, Jasmine returned to her small apartment near Bayshore Boulevard. Rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the window. She closed her eyes, remembering the sound of thunder from that night in Miami. And miles away, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Alex sat alone at his piano. He pressed one key, then another, slow, unsure, imperfect. For a man who believed perfection was everything, he suddenly realized he was playing offbeat. And strangely, it felt alive. A week passed. The Florida heat pressed against the hospital windows as another exhausting day began. Jasmine Moore was starting to understand the rhythm of neurosurgery: long hours, quiet corridors, and the constant hum of machines that measured life second by second. But there was one thing she could not get used to: working beside Dr. Alex Henderson. Every morning, he greeted her with the same calm professionalism, never once showing recognition of the night that had started it all. To everyone else, he was the perfect mentor: sharp, poised, untouchable. To Jasmine, he was a storm she had to walk through every single day. One afternoon, As she reviewed patient charts, a nurse rushed in. "Dr. Henderson needs you in OR3. Emergency case." Her pulse quickened. She scrubbed in quickly and entered the operating room. A middle-aged man lay on the table, a brain aneurysm about to rupture. Alex was already at work, hands steady, voice low but firm. "Clamp ready. Suction." Jasmine followed each instruction without hesitation. The air was thick with tension. Then, as the blood pressure monitor spiked, she reacted faster than anyone switching the saline line, stabilizing the vitals. For a moment, the chaos stopped. Alex looked up at her through the face shield. Their eyes met over the patient. He gave a slight nod. "Good catch." It was the first time he had praised her aloud. After the operation, as the team cleaned up, a nurse whispered to Jasmine, "He never says good job to anyone." Jasmine smiled faintly but said nothing. Later that night, the residents gathered in the hospital lounge. The television played softly in the background, and someone mentioned the charity gala next month hosted by the Henderson Foundation. "Dr. Henderson always brings a date," one intern joked. "Usually someone from the hospital." Jasmine felt heat rise to her cheeks and excused herself. When she reached the stairwell, she found him standing there alone, looking out the small window at the lights of Tampa Bay. "You did well today," he said without turning. "Thank you, doctor," she replied. He exhaled slowly, his voice quiet. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who still believed medicine could save everyone." Jasmine hesitated, then asked softly, "What happened to her?" He turned to face her, eyes dark. "She died on my table 3 years ago." Silence filled the stairwell. The confession hung heavy between them. Jasmine saw it then, the reason behind his walls, the reason he chased perfection. It was not pride, it was grief. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "It keeps me focused." But his hands were trembling just slightly. A few days later, the hospital board called a meeting. Jasmine was summoned unexpectedly. She walked into the conference room, confused, and found Alex already seated across from the directors. The chief administrator cleared his throat. "Dr. Henderson, we have received an anonymous complaint alleging an inappropriate relationship with an intern under your supervision." The room went cold. Jasmine's heart stopped. Alex's face remained perfectly calm. "That is false," he said evenly. But the board pressed further. "Security footage from the Grandview Hotel was submitted this morning. The dates align with Miss Moore's rotation start." Jasmine's breath caught. Someone had traced that night. Her fingers tightened on the chair. Alex spoke again, still calm. "If this is about a private matter before her employment, it has no bearing on hospital conduct." The director frowned. "Still, it puts the institution at risk. Until the matter is cleared, we are suspending both of you for review." Jasmine felt the world spin. Alex stood, his tone steady but low. "She had nothing to do with this. I will take full responsibility." "Dr. Henderson," she tried to speak, but he cut her off. "Go home, Jasmine, that is an order." His words were sharp, but his eyes said something else. "Trust me." Outside the boardroom, the hall was empty. She caught up to him near the elevators. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her, the control gone from his voice for once. "Because you do not deserve to lose everything for one mistake that was mine." "It was not a mistake," she whispered. For the first time, silence fell not out of fear but out of truth. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside. "Then I owe you more than I can ever repay." The doors closed, leaving her alone with the echo of his words. That evening, Jasmine packed her things from the intern dormitory. Rain began again, streaking down the glass. A folded note slipped from her bag. It was the same note he had left that morning after their one night together. She stared at the words. "Do not overthink it. Take care." Now she understood. It was never a goodbye. It was the way a man too afraid to love tried to protect someone he already did. And somewhere across town, Alex sat in his empty office, the letter of suspension on his desk. He stared at the silver badge in his hand, the one engraved J. Moore. For the first time, he realized control had cost him the only thing real he had ever found. He closed his eyes and whispered, maybe losing control was the only way to start living again. Outside, thunder rolled over the bay, and the lights of Tampa flickered like a heartbeat refusing to stop. 2 months passed. Florida's summer heat had given way to late autumn rain, and the hospital hallways felt quieter without the familiar sound of Dr. Alex Henderson's voice. He had resigned before the board could reach its verdict. The newspapers wrote about it. For a week, star neurosurgeon steps down amid ethics scandal. Then the headlines moved on, but the people who mattered did not forget. Jasmine Moore had returned to her hometown to care for her mother after surgery. The house was small, the walls thin, but for the first time in years, peace filled the air. Still, every time she walked past the community clinic, the smell of antiseptic reminded her of him. She told herself to move on, but some memories refused to be buried. One evening, while sorting medical reports, she found a letter tucked inside one of her mother's files. The envelope bore the logo of the Henderson Medical Foundation. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it. The letter was dated 2 weeks after her suspension. Miss Moore, your surgery costs have been fully covered by a private donor. You are free from all remaining hospital bills. Wishing you continued recovery. Henderson Foundation. Her eyes filled with tears. He had paid for her mother's operation after losing everything. The man she thought was running away had been quietly fighting for her all along. Days later, a charity invitation arrived by email, the annual Medical Innovation Gala, sponsored by the same foundation. At the bottom of the invitation, one line caught her eye. Keynote speaker, Dr. Alex Henderson. Jasmine stared at the screen for a long time. Her heart raced as memories flooded back the hotel room, the board hearing, the words he whispered before leaving. Maybe losing control was the only way to start living again. That night, she made her decision. The gala was held at a hotel near Tampa Bay, all glass and gold light. Guests in elegant gowns and tuxedos filled the ballroom, their laughter echoing against crystal chandeliers. Jasmine stood near the entrance in a simple navy dress, her hands cold. Then she saw him. Alex stood on stage, speaking to a room full of doctors and donors. He looked the same, yet different, no longer wearing the armor of perfection. His voice was steady but warm, his eyes alive. Medicine is not about control, he said into the microphone. It is about faith. Sometimes we lose patients, sometimes we lose ourselves. But healing begins the moment we stop pretending to be untouchable. The audience applauded. Jasmine felt her throat tighten. When the lights dimmed for the next presentation, she turned to leave, but a familiar voice stopped her. You came, he said softly behind her. She turned. Alex stood there, close enough that she could see the faint scar on his hand, the mark from that night in the operating room. Why would you still help us after everything? She asked. Because it was never about reputation, he said. It was about doing the right thing, and about someone who reminded me what right even means. Jasmine's eyes glistened. You did not have to lose your career for me. He shook his head gently. Maybe I needed to lose it to find what really matters. Lauk. They stood there, surrounded by soft music and distant laughter. For a moment, the rest of the world faded away. Later that evening, rain began to fall outside. Guests gathered beneath the awnings, and Jasmine stepped out for air. Alex followed her, holding an umbrella over both of them. What are you doing now? He asked. I started working at the community clinic, she said. Smaller cases, smaller pay, but real people. He smiled. Sounds like you are saving lives without a spotlight. And you? Trying to build something new. A center for training young surgeons who believe compassion is not a weakness. She looked up at him through the rain. You mean a place for people like us? He nodded. Exactly like us. For the first time since that night in Miami, they both laughed. The storm had passed, and in its quiet wake, something gentle remained, something they had both been too afraid to name. As lightning flashed over the bay, he said quietly, Jasmine, if I told you I still keep your badge in my drawer, would that sound crazy? She smiled softly. Only if I told you I still have your note. They stood in silence, the rain falling around them, the city glowing beneath their feet. Neither of them said the word love. They did not need to. It was already there in the forgiveness, the courage, and the quiet space they shared beneath one umbrella. 2 weeks later, the headlines shifted once again, this time not about scandal, but about hope. The Henderson Medical Foundation announced a new initiative, the Compassionate Care Project, a free neurosurgery program for patients who could not afford treatment. At the bottom of the press release was a single line that caught everyone's attention. Co-director, Dr. Alex Henderson, and Dr. Jasmine Moore. Jasmine stared at the announcement on her phone, still unable to believe it. She had agreed to join only after endless persuasion from Alex. He wanted her beside him, not because of their past, but because he truly believed in what they could build together. Still, deep down, she wondered if the world would ever let them forget that night in Miami. The opening day of the new center was bright and calm, with sunlight spilling through the glass atrium. Reporters, patients, and local families filled the lobby. Alex stood at the podium, his white coat crisp, his expression focused yet peaceful. Jasmine waited in the background, clipboard in hand, helping the nurses organize the first group of patients. I used to think being a doctor meant never making mistakes, Alex said into the microphone. But sometimes our mistakes are what bring us to the truth. Today is proof that even broken things can build something whole. Applause filled the room. Jasmine's heart swelled with quiet pride. When the ceremony ended, Alex walked over, his voice low so only she could hear. You should be up there with me. No, she smiled. You are the one people came to see. That is where you are wrong, he said gently. They came to see what change looks like. Their eyes met for a long moment, and for the first time, there was no distance left between them. No fear, no guilt, no pretending. That evening, as the hospital emptied, they walked side by side through the quiet hallways of the new center. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. In one of the patient rooms, a small boy lay recovering from surgery. His mother looked up as they entered. He's going to be all right, Mrs. Garcia, Jasmine said softly. The woman took her hand with tears in her eyes. Thank you, doctor. You and Dr. Henderson gave my son a second chance. Lamla. Outside the room, Alex whispered. That is why we are here. Jasmine nodded. To give second chances to others, and maybe to ourselves. Later, as twilight painted the sky orange and pink, they stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking Tampa Bay. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and the city lights shimmered like a constellation reflected in the water. Do you ever think about that night? She asked quietly. Every day, he admitted, but not the way I used to. I thought it ruined me. Now I think it saved me. Yempong. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out her old hospital badge, the one she had left behind all those months ago. I kept this to remind myself what honesty feels like, he said. Her eyes glistened. I kept your note for the same reason. He smiled, the kind of smile that came from peace, not pride. Jasmine Moore, he said, I do not want one more night. I want every morning, every storm, every impossible day with you. She blinked back tears. Are you asking me to marry you, Dr. Henderson? Not asking, he said softly. Promising. The next day, the center's staff arrived to find a small glass frame hung in the main hallway. Inside it was Jasmine's old badge, resting above a handwritten line that read, Mistakes can destroy us, or they can make us human. We chose the second. Outside, the Florida sun rose over the bay, golden and alive just like the beginning of something new. 3 months later, the Compassionate Care Project had become the heartbeat of Tampa's medical community. The new center was no longer just a building. It was a symbol, place where second chances were not a slogan, but a daily reality. Dr. Jasmine Moore had grown into her role as co-director. Her calm, steady presence balanced Dr. Alex Henderson's quiet intensity. Together, they created something neither of them could have built alone. But even in the warmth of success, rumors began to stir again. A National Medical Board representative visited the center, hinting that Alex's reinstatement as a licensed surgeon would be reviewed. To most people, it was good news, but Alex felt a familiar weight pressing down on his chest. That evening, he stood in his office staring out at the city lights, hands clasped behind his back. Jasmine walked in, holding a folder. You missed dinner, she said softly. He smiled faintly. Old habits. I used to think I was saving the world one surgery at a time. She placed the folder on his desk. You still are, just in a different way. He turned to her. They want me to go back to reclaim the title, the position. But that world cost me everything once. I do not know if I can step back into it. Jasmine looked at him, her expression steady. Maybe it is not about going back. Maybe it is about proving that you have changed. He took a deep breath. Would you stand with me if I do? She smiled. You already know the answer. A week later, the board hearing was held in Orlando. The panel of doctors questioned him for hours about ethics, conduct, and accountability. Alex spoke with quiet honesty. I made a choice that blurred professional boundaries, he said. But I also learned that perfection without compassion is empty. If medicine is to heal, it must heal the doctors too. The room fell silent. Then the chairwoman nodded slowly. Your license is reinstated, Dr. Henderson. Under one condition, you continue leading your foundation. The world needs both versions of you. That night, back in Tampa, the staff gathered for a small celebration. Laughter filled the corridors as nurses carried trays of cupcakes and coffee. Jasmine found Alex standing by the window again, the Florida sunset painting his face in gold. You did it, she said. We did. He corrected her. She stepped closer. How does it feel? He looked down at her, a quiet smile forming. It feels like peace. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and understated. You already said yes to a future, he said. But I would like to make it official. Her eyes softened. Alex, you do not need to prove anything to me. I am not proving, he said. I am choosing. He slipped the ring onto her finger. The entire room seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the faint hum of the hospital lights. Later that night, after the celebration ended, they walked along the bay outside the center. The water shimmered under the moonlight. A warm breeze brushed past them. Do you ever think about how all of this started? Jasmine asked. A one-night mistake, he said with a quiet laugh. I used to think that night ruined me. Now I think it saved me. Maybe both, she replied gently. He stopped walking and looked at her. Do you regret it? She shook her head. No, because sometimes life does not give us perfect beginnings. It gives us real ones. They stood together in silence, watching the tide roll in, the waves erasing every trace of what came before. The next morning, a nurse found a new note taped to the glass frame in the hallway. It was written in Alex's handwriting. To every doctor who has failed, to every heart that has broken, remember, healing is not about never falling. It is about learning how to rise. And beneath the note, someone had added, in neat handwriting, Jasmine's handwriting. And sometimes, rising together is the cure we never knew we needed. The Florida sun broke through the clouds once more, flooding the center with light. And for Alex and Jasmine, it was not just the start of another day, it was the proof that redemption, once found, could last a lifetime. 3 months later, the rhythm of the Compassionate Care Center had become a heartbeat of its own. Patients came from across Florida, some from other states, drawn by stories of a hospital that healed without judgment. To the public, Dr. Alex Henderson and Dr. Jasmine Moore were symbols of hope. But behind the calm smiles, both of them knew how fragile peace could be. One Friday morning, Alex received a letter marked urgent from the National Medical Board. He opened it slowly, scanning the words, his expression unreadable. Jasmine entered his office a moment later, holding coffee for both of them. Bad news? She asked. A review, he said quietly. They want a full audit of our foundation's finances. Someone filed a complaint. Nunjer. Jasmine frowned. A complaint? From who? It does not say, but it means weeks of investigation, delays, and questions we already answered years ago. She placed the cup on his desk, her eyes steady. We have nothing to hide, Alex. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. But it feels like every time we take a step forward, something tries to pull us back. She smiled gently. Then we will take the next step together. The following week, investigators arrived at the center. They reviewed files, interviewed staff, and examined donations. Whispers spread through the hospital halls. Some wondered if the old scandal had resurfaced. During one of the meetings, an auditor mentioned that a large anonymous donation over $200,000 had been used to fund the center's first year. Alex felt his stomach tighten. That money had come from his personal accounts. But officially, it was listed as anonymous because he wanted the focus on the mission, not his name. The auditor pressed further. Dr. Henderson, were you attempting to conceal your involvement? He looked the man straight in the eye. No. I was protecting the dignity of the people we serve. This center was never about me. That night, Jasmine found him sitting alone in the empty lobby. The glass walls reflected the city lights, the same way they had the night they first met. You are carrying this like it is your fault, she said softly. Maybe it is, he replied. Every problem seems to trace back to my name. And every life saved does too, she reminded him. You cannot separate them. You just have to accept that both are true. Her words settled in the quiet air like a balm. He looked up at her. How do you stay so calm through all of this? Because I have already seen what chaos looks like, she said. And because I know who you are when the world stops watching. He smiled faintly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. 2 weeks later, the board issued its final report. The foundation was cleared of all wrongdoing. The anonymous donor was publicly identified as Dr. Henderson himself, and the story spread across national media, not as another scandal, but as redemption. An article headline read, "The surgeon who fell from grace builds a hospital that heals more than bodies." Jasmine clipped the article and placed it in a small frame beside the glass case that still held her old badge. That evening, she found Alex standing there, reading the framed headline. You know, she said softly, for someone who wanted to stay invisible, you have become a symbol for a lot of people. He turned to her with a small, tired smile. Maybe visibility is not the problem. Maybe it is what we do with it that matters. They stood there together in the soft glow of the hallway lights, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines that kept the hospital alive. For the first time, they both knew they were no longer running from the past. They were rewriting it one healed life at a time. The following spring arrived quietly in Florida. The Compassionate Care Center was busier than ever, yet somehow more peaceful. The storm that had once surrounded Dr. Alex Henderson and Dr. Jasmine Moore had finally faded into memory. Now, the air inside the hospital felt lighter, as if every patient who walked through the doors brought a little more light with them. Jasmine moved between patient rooms, checking charts and offering smiles that carried warmth instead of exhaustion. She had become the heart of the place, steady, grounded, and real. Alex often watched her from a distance, struck by how naturally she belonged here. She had once been the intern who feared making mistakes. Now she was the doctor who turned mistakes into lessons for others. One afternoon, Alex received a letter from the National Board. Inside was an official invitation to speak at the annual Medical Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. They wanted him to share the story of the Compassionate Care Project as a model of reform in medical ethics. He sat in silence for a long time, reading the letter twice. Then he looked out the window at the courtyard where Jasmine was laughing with a young patient. He realized he no longer needed recognition, but maybe the story itself could help others the way Jasmine had helped him. That evening, he handed her the letter. "They want me to speak next month," he said quietly. "You should," she encouraged. "Tell them what compassion looks like when it wears a white coat." He smiled. "Only if you come with me." "Me? I am not the one they invited," she teased. "They invited the story," he replied. "And you are half of it." When they arrived in Washington weeks later, the grand conference hall shimmered with glass and light. Hundreds of doctors, professors, and students filled the seats. As Alex stepped onto the stage, Jasmine watched from the front row, her hands clasped tightly. He began simply. "A few years ago, I thought success meant control. I thought compassion was a weakness. Then I made a mistake that cost me everything. But that mistake introduced me to someone who taught me that healing begins where control ends." The audience listened in silence. His voice never wavered. The Compassionate Care Center exists because of that lesson. It is proof that medicine is not just about saving lives. It is about saving the humanity inside the people who save them. When he finished, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and in the middle of the noise, his eyes found hers. Jasmine smiled the same quiet, unwavering smile she had worn the night they first met. That evening, they stood outside the hotel balcony, overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, and the stars glowed faintly beyond the clouds. "You were incredible," Jasmine said. "No," he answered softly. "We were." He took her hand and pressed it against his chest. "You once told me that chaos teaches you calm. I think you were right." She looked up at him. "And you taught me that calm can still have passion." They laughed quietly, the sound blending with the hum of the city below. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, the kind doctors wore at medical graduations. "This was given to me the day I first took the oath to do no harm," he said. "I want you to have it." Jasmine shook her head. "It is yours." "No," he said gently. "It belongs to the doctor who reminded me what that oath truly means." He pinned it carefully to her coat, his touch steady and full of meaning. In that moment, under the soft glow of the Washington skyline, the man who once lost everything finally found peace. And the woman who once feared her mistakes finally understood that love, like medicine, was not about perfection, it was about faith. 1 year later, the Compassionate Care Center stood taller than ever, its windows glowing against the Florida sunrise. The foundation had grown into a national model, with new clinics opening across the country under the same name. But for Dr. Alex Henderson and Dr. Jasmine Moore, the greatest success was not in the headlines or the awards. It was in the quiet moments when healing truly happened. On a warm Sunday morning, the hospital courtyard was filled with families, patients, and staff celebrating the first anniversary of the center. Laughter echoed between the palm trees, and a string quartet played softly near the fountain. Jasmine moved through the crowd, greeting people, her long white coat fluttering lightly in the breeze. Children ran past her, their parents waving gratefully to the doctors who had saved their lives. Alex stood on the stage, microphone in hand, his eyes searching until they found her. "When we built this place," he said, "we thought it would just be a hospital, but it became something more, a reminder that redemption is possible, even after our biggest mistakes. And that compassion is not weakness, it is strength." Applause rose around him, but his gaze never left hers. He stepped down from the stage, walked through the cheering crowd, and stopped in front of Jasmine. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then he took her hand and knelt on one knee. "Jasmine Moore," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You taught me how to heal long before I ever learned to love. I do not want another day without you. Will you marry me? The courtyard fell silent, waiting. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was bright and sure. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The crowd erupted in applause. Confetti fluttered through the air, sunlight catching on every piece like sparks of gold. Later that evening, when the celebration had ended and the hospital lights dimmed, they walked together down the quiet hallway. They stopped at the glass display on the main wall, the same one that held Jasmine's old badge, and the handwritten quote. Beneath it, Alex had added one more line in neat handwriting. This is where a mistake became a promise. Jasmine rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think we finally got it right? He smiled softly. We did not need to get it perfect. We just needed to mean it. Outside, the waves of Tampa Bay shimmered under the moonlight. The world that had once judged them now looked at them with admiration. 2 doctors, 2 hearts. One story that began with a single mistake and ended with something far greater: forgiveness, purpose, and a love that had finally learned how to stay. As the night breeze whispered through the palm trees, the words on the glass seemed to glow faintly under the soft light. From a mistake, we found the heartbeat again.